tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So, we have been beginning this year with what I'm calling Dharma Life Reset, a way to talk about some of the foundations. I kind of want to say the foundational foundations. I don't know why. The very foundations of our practice. And I'm going in with this idea that we talked about a couple weeks ago of, what if instead of thinking about my meditation as a support for the rest of my life, what if I think about the rest of my life as a support for my meditation? So how do we set up the conditions for the beautiful mind, for the relaxed open heart, for, in terms of the three spectra we were looking at in the meditation today, how do I set up the conditions for easeful pleasure in the emotional body, the conditions for bright energy in the energetic body, and the conditions for focus in the cognitive body, the mental body? How do we set up those conditions? And we just talked for a couple weeks about sleep and the importance of sleep, how sleep affects focus and attention, how it, of course, affects energy and wakefulness, and how it affects mood and emotion. So, and deep winter is a very good time to do sleep practice, to really to take seriously getting good rest, especially in times of trouble, but actually always. So, respect your sleep, respect the body's need for sleep. And in that meditation we did today, you can do that with any one of these foundations. You can do it with sleep, remembering what it feels like. We did this a little bit last week. Remembering what it feels like to be well slept, right? I know what that feels like. Because the more I know what it feels like, the more I will be conscious of when I'm not there, right? You know what it feels like to be underslept or not well slept, but you can also habituate that state. I have definitely done that at moments in my life. I can get so good at being underslept that I don't really notice how bad it feels. And if I really remember, if I focus on remembering, being well slept feels like this, balanced energy feels like this, then I can start to notice when I've slipped away from that. And that's just a reminder, right? As the hindrances are always reminders to get back in the game, right? To bring back the discipline of sleeping well as best we can. And so this next foundation, food, in a certain way, the talk about it is exactly the same, right? You know what it feels like to be not eating well, and you know what it feels like to have been eating well, and how eating well for you, how it's palpable in the body. And so this isn't a talk so much on here's my ideas for what kind of food is healthiest, right? I'm not going to proselytize a certain diet that you should get this much protein or this much fats or this much nutrients of this or that. There's tons of that information out there. You probably already have, ideas for what's good for you. And I'm not going to proselytize being vegetarian, although in a footnote, I think it's wonderful, deeply Buddhist, and fabulously pleasurable. And I love having been vegetarian for the last almost 35 years now. So there you go. That's the end of my proselytizing vegetarianism. I love it. And you can too. All right. Anyway, but that's not what this is about. I want to talk about food really as the fundamental substance of our life and how it affects everything that we do. And the food, of course, is necessary for life. Classically in Buddhism, it's one of the nutriments. There are ancient verses in the Vedas that talk about being food. The first of the classical Upanishadic sheaths or bodies is the Annamaya Kosha, which is the sheath of food. In a very deep way, South Asian culture has recognized for a long time that we are food. I heard a Dharma talk from a Thai forest monk at one point who made it really clear that he kind of painted a picture of like, look, here's how it is, right? When you're born, right, your body is created from your mother's body, and out of a womb and through food, right? And so when you're born, you're this baby, you're tiny, and how do you grow? You get fed. So you put food in, and the body grows. And where does food come from? Food is plants, and it's either plants directly going into your body or plants going through the bodies of animals and coming out as like, milk or cheese, or food is the bodies of animals. So it's animal products or animal bodies or the plants that the animals eat. Fundamentally, it all comes from plants. And of course, plants come from earth nutrients and sunlight and water. So these elements that are earth, right? Earth and water and fire in the form of sunlight, and wind in the form of movement and change, these four fundamental elements, they become plants. And plants become food, and we eat food. And food becomes us. So we digest some part of the plant, some other part we excrete, and it goes back into the cycle. And so in a very fundamental, straightforward way, we are food. So you are food. And so the talk from this Forest Sangha teacher was almost like the image of plants like coming up out of the ground, coming into our body, moving across the earth, and then rejoining the earth, right, as excrement and then eventually as a corpse. And so then we are just moving plants. Plants move around the world through our bodies and then return to the earth. And food then points to the way that in our very being as animals, there's this cycle of consumption, right? We are burning, right? Just like a fire that has to keep finding fuel to burn or else it goes out, we have to keep finding food to burn or else we go out. And so we have this deep relationship with the process of nourishing the body and finding decent nourishment for the body, right? We have to find nutritious food. We find the most nutritious food we can. As humans, we have become, as a species, very, very fond of extremely expensive nutritional foods. So, the bodies of cows, for instance, one of the most resource-intensive things we could possibly eat. But extraordinary amount of nutrients for our bodies, right? There are historians who think of our relationship with grain, with wheat and rice and corn, right? The great grains, as a process of cultivation, not us cultivating them, but them cultivating us. Like if you think as a sentient wheat plant in Central Asia a very, very, very long time ago, and you notice that that the plumpest and sweetest among you keep getting chewed up by these animals that come by, you will get plumper and sweeter. And you realize that the more plump and sweet you get, the more chewed up you get, the more you spread all around the globe until you are the most dominant grass in the world, right? And not only that, but you train these animals who, before they encountered you, just wandered through picking berries and acorns and foraging for things. You train them to essentially ruin their lives by staying in one place and cultivating you at backbreaking toil, generation after generation, practically destroying themselves as a species in order to grow more and more of you. Wheat, the overlord, So you can think of yourself as, the descendant of people who were deeply bonded, deeply, servants to, wheat, rice, and corn. Which of course, and you can flip that, you can go animist on that and recognize them as deities, goddesses of sorts. Certainly the corn goddess here is very well known. So, this is who we are. We are beings who have structured our entire cultures around the cultivation of food. And then as Dharma practitioners, we come to practice, looking for the relief of stress, the relief of dukkha, of pain. And we have this aspect of our life that we do, most of us every single day, and most of us several times a day. We need more fuel. And so how do we practice with this fundamental aspect of human existence, our food nature? So we do this on a few levels, right? Of course, there's the level of how do we, if we have the privilege to choose what foods we eat, which many of us do, but some do not. Of course, it's appropriate to practice gratitude for the food that we eat, gratitude for the plants, for the animals, for the workers, for all of the forces that brought it to us, of course. But in the process of choosing what to eat, we enter, probably one of the more complex, ongoing, ordinary ethical challenges of our lives. It's complex because lots of people have a lot to say about it, and people can get very, very judgmental and defensive and angry and confused about, narratives about what we eat, choices about what we eat. And so, as practice, how can our practice support us in using the choice for what to eat as a moment of practice? And I think that there's a couple of directions that the Buddha's teachings suggest to us. Everyone on this call, but not necessarily everyone hearing this talk in the future, but most folks, I think, consuming this talk, we'll get on to consuming media, but consuming this talk, are not monastics. So I'll just say with a bow to our monastic sangha that the Buddha's instructions on food for the monastics were really about structuring a healthy relationship between monastics and lay people. So monastics can eat in allowable times of day, which is between dawn and midday. I'm speaking to monastics in the Theravada tradition or the southern traditions. Other traditions have altered these Vinaya regulations in different ways. But in the Pali Canon, it's described that monastics are to eat before noon and not store food overnight. And so this creates the relationship that the monastics have to be gifted food every single day by lay people. And so even if that's like lay people living at the monastery and, in a separate area from the monastics and storing food there and cooking for them, the monastics themselves are technically, homeless wanderers who have to be gifted food every day and can't store food overnight. And this makes it impossible, for instance, for monks or nuns to go off and be hermits, to get 6 months worth of food and then hole up in a cave, meditate full time. provisions for that were developed in like the Himalayan systems and the Zen systems, but in the early Buddhist system, that kind of practitioner would have to be a layperson, because you can't store food overnight. And so because of that, the Buddha does not give any other regulations on what food monastics eat. And so people are sometimes folks are surprised to hear that the monastics don't have the requirement to be vegetarian, because if the monastics express any preference at all about food, that changes the gift economy relationship, right? A gift in a certain way has to be no strings attached. And the recipient of a gift is their whole identity actually changes if they're asking for specific things. So it's important for the monastics not to ask for specific things. Of course, lay people learn, what monastics like, and get their favorite things for them, sometimes obsessively until it's no longer the monastic's favorite thing. This happened to Ajahn Chah. One of Ajahn Chah's, lay disciples learned that Ajahn Chah really liked yellow curry. And so then he brought yellow curry every single day. And pretty soon, Ajahn Chah said, I used to like yellow curry, So, there you go, on choice and preference. But for us as lay people, and anyway, first of all, just a side note on eating before noon. It saves time for meditating and doesn't tax the lay people so much. Like, you don't go begging 3 times a day for 3 meals, right? You go begging once and you eat 1 meal. Helpful. And but stopping, doing all of your eating within like an 8-hour window and then having the rest of the day not eating is actually tremendously healthy for your digestion. And nowadays it's called intermittent fasting. And I highly recommend it. So that's one of the things that you can do, practicing with food. You have to figure out what to do if you've got a family and like family dinner time is a thing. We have, to be honest, my family here, 2 adults who really like intermittent fasting and a 9-year-old who comes home from school. Like, we have family dinner and half the time neither my partner nor I actually want to eat anything. And like, I had my meal and so we're sort of like, we don't have a good solution to like sitting down at the family dinner table. We make a meal for our kid and we're like, your Buddhist parents are not eating very much at dinner time, because we prefer to eat our big meal at 1 in the afternoon and then be done. So I love the particular the timing structure of intermittent fasting. So you can play with that. But for choosing what food to eat, a couple other just pieces to note. So you're lay people, you can choose whatever you want if you have the privilege to buy various kinds of food. The main thing that I think about is of course, for health, what's the impact of the food that I'm choosing on my body? So that's one thing to track. And then what's the impact of the food that I'm choosing on the external ecosystem? So am I eating foods that have a harmful impact on the ecosystem where they were grown or raised or sold or bought? And am I eating food that have a harmful impact on the internal ecosystem of my body? So internal first, this is, essentially eat what's healthy for you. And there's so many ideas about this. Like I said, I wasn't going to go into it very much, so I won't. I'll tell you that my favorite system myself is essentially macrobiotic vegetarian. So I'm kind of old school about it. So I favor a kind of, whole grains and legumes and lots of vegetables and fermented foods kind of diet. And like I said, I'm vegetarian. The thing I like about finding what kinds of foods, what kind of a diet works for my body, is that I can track feeling well. Oh, I eat this way, I feel well. I eat other ways, I don't feel as well. And that's the main practice that I'll encourage for health is whatever your preferred system, you're like, oh, I need, I need way more protein. I'm like, cool, eat more protein. And then track, oh, I feel well. This is what feeling well is like, Oh, I need, less grain. Great, track it. Oh, I eat less grain, I feel well. And so you're looking for the feeling of well-being. Food is so important and central to identity, culture, health, and well-being, all these things, that unfortunately, this basic guideline to know what well-being feels like and then to cultivate that feeling, that is complicated by layers and layers of culture that encourage that can get us really confused about what feeling well is like, because we get confused about, am I feeling well, or do I just like my body image? Like eating disorders can be like, yeah, I feel well because I feel attractive, or I feel like I'm going to be accepted by other people. How do I distinguish between, I feel, socially a certain way, or culturally or relationally a certain way, versus, how does my bodily energy work? And so we could say a lot more about that, and it gets complex. I'll encourage you to go back to something like these three basic spectra for well-being. How do I feel emotionally? How do I feel energetically? And how do I feel in terms of like mental focus? So if I generally have positive emotion, bright energy, and focus, I'm going to call that well-being. And so can I eat in a way that promotes those qualities? And so we have to experiment, right? You'll find what works for you. You probably know what works for you. Once you know what works well for your body, like in this stage of your life, then your practice is essentially like, do that, and then notice when you don't do that. So like, oh, why am I eating in a way that I know doesn't make me feel good? And there's going to be all sorts of reasons, right? We eat emotionally, we eat relationally, we eat based on all sorts of things, and habits and unconscious things, and social trends, and lots of reasons. But in the same way that with sleep, like I might have to deal with my desire to stay up late and the pleasure of that, and balance that with how I feel the next day. There will be a place of discipline in your practice where you there's like a tipping point in practice where you begin to favor feeling well over other kinds of pleasures, right? Over the pleasures of being entertained, let's say, for instance, or the pleasure of other kinds of social pleasures can lose their thrill as we become more, I'll say, attached to feeling well. And so part of the guidance for like coming through the thicket of complex feelings about health and how to eat and how to care for the body is to get attached to feeling well, and to learn what feeling well actually is like, and disentangle some of the threads of why I don't feel well, right? Many of which are going to be emotional, relational, cultural, narrative. So learning to choose well what food supports me to feel well internally, and then learning to choose well what food causes the least harm externally. So where does my food come from? Who grew it? Who raised it? If I'm eating animals, how were they treated? What's their life like? Were they raised and killed in a way that respects them as beings? This is totally possible, right? there's many ways we can think about what's the impact, of my food choices. I know, one of my friends says, she's not vegetarian because animal protein is very, very helpful for her to feel well, but she doesn't support the beef and chicken and pig industry and all of the evils of that. So she raises rabbits in her backyard for meat, and she has a whole herd of rabbits that she kills and cooks herself. And so, and she says, I'll take, I'll take a rabbit that I raised from birth in my backyard and the very, very, very low ecosystem cost of that over, shipping Brazil nuts for my protein, from the tropics. And so you can think in lots of different ways about the cost, right? The impact of your food externally, and make any number of choices about it. So again, the Buddha doesn't tell you which choice to make, but the Dharma that the Buddha brought forward gives you a framework for how to make that choice, right? To think about how much harm is caused, what the impact is, and how we might live in a way that uplifts our intention for all beings to be well, for ourselves to be well, right? To not cause harm as much as possible. Right? So we find our way with that. And so we're making choices then about what we eat, about what time we eat it. Of course, there are the guidelines on mindful eating. I'm not going to say too much about that. They are relatively straightforward. It can be a very good practice to slow down when you eat, to just eat when you're eating, and not do other things, to really focus on the food, to give a prayer of gratitude for the food, and really taste your food, really see it. Look at it, taste it. This is a very macrobiotic thing to say. Chew it, chew your food several times. I did go through a whole phase when I was young of trying to chew each mouthful of food at least 40 times. The macrobiotic guideline was 50, but really I could rarely get to 50. But those guys were mostly eating brown rice and half-cooked beans, so 50 was helpful if that's what you're eating. But chew your food, and just be present with it, because to finish, what practicing with food comes back to, right? And we can get really lost in the ideas and the conversations about what we're eating and how we're choosing, and meat and agribusiness and all of that. But to just come back to this piece that goes back to the most ancient layer of the Dharma, which is that we are composed of food. Food is what we are. We are not separate from the ecosystem of food and plants and animals and dirt and sunlight. We are completely just a stage in that cycle. And so how do we play our role in that cycle in a way that respects every part of that cycle? How do we eat in a way that respects the sunlight and the rain and the earth and the plants and the animals and the pollinators, right? And also in the human social ecosystem in a way that respects the farm workers and the truckers and the grocery store workers and the folks who cook and the folks who process food and the folks whose lives are completely devoted to making food available for the 8 billion some people that we now are. Can we eat in a way that respects all of these forces, gives gratitude, gives honor, and is constructed, like our discipline of eating is constructed around our core intentions, right? The core intentions in the Eightfold Path to to harmlessness, to kindness, to non-hatred, and to letting go, to renunciation. So, all right, so that's a general framework then for thinking about food, for practicing with our nature as food. And, as practice, as you head out from here, I'll just encourage, as the primary practice around food to, in a way, bring our mindfulness, our awareness, our curiosity to the process of shopping, cooking, eating, defecating, growing, any part of that whole cycle that we participate in, all the parts we participate in, to bring awareness to the cycle of being food, being earth, being food as it moves through us, and to notice anywhere in that cycle where we either like gloss over the truth of what's happening, or we tend to space out, or we kind of we have habitually become unconscious, right? And so to just become more conscious, to practice being more conscious at any point in that cycle that you can remember to do so. So when you're buying your vegetables at the store or the farmer's market or wherever you buy your vegetables, right? Like really just land with that for a moment, right? I'm just picking up these heads of broccoli, these huge, gorgeous, poofy broccoli heads. How did somebody grow that? That's amazing. I can't grow, but my broccolis are like scrawny. I don't even know. It's incredible. And they're organic, but like actually get it. And that like this broccoli came from this box unpacked by this worker at this store that went through this truck, from this farm to these people who planted it and tended it, and the bugs and and all the way back in the sun and the rain. And you could do that for anything, I pull a salmon fillet out of the freezer to give to my kid because he has expensive tastes and it's his favorite snack. So I'm making him salmon right and left. And to just pause, as I'm sliding the salmon into the pan, and it's just a tiny piece of what clearly from the size of this piece was an enormous fish. And to just like, you don't even have to like do much mental processing. You kind of just feel the piece of food, the salmon, the broccoli, the nut, the oat, the whatever it is, all right? I'm just mindlessly pouring yet another, cup full of rice into the pan. How many times in my life have I cooked a pot of rice? Uncountable times. To just stop and connect with, rice, right? The great grain, right? The great overlord grain. How much I am made of rice, indebted to rice, worship rice. I am rice. Just wake up to the reality of what we're doing. Oh, these grasses planted in the mud, or the dry, earth of Northern California by the Lundberg family for 5 generations, blessings to the Lundbergs. Wherever you go with this, it's like bring consciousness to that moment, and you could go super cosmic and just be the cycle of elements. That's a beautiful meditation on anatta, selflessness. Or you could go, very human justice and like connect with, the farm workers. May they be safe in the current administration and everyone else. Wherever you go with it, the instruction I think is to bring consciousness to being part of this cycle that we participate in every single day. Yeah, and then to do what feels best and most healthy for our own bodies, for our families, for our communities, for the external communities, and everyone touched by this cycle of the food we eat. All right. Blessings to the food and all the people who move food and with food and who are food. So, all right. Letting it go for now. Beautiful. Beautiful. Hi, blessings in your practice. Thanks for watching. If these resources are supportive for your meditation and your practice, liking and subscribing helps the channel. And there are links in the description below to donate to support the Sangha and my own teaching. And you're welcome to come and join the Tuesday night gathering, which is on donation and open to all. And you can find information for that on the website. So blessings in your practice. Take care.